Grief is supposed to bring families together, but the day of my husband's will reading felt like I had walked into a courtroom where I was the only one on trial. The air in the lawyer's office was thick, heavy, and full of silent expectations. My son Daniel sat straight-backed, his wife Vanessa perched next to him with a smug little smile, as though she already knew the outcome. My brother-in-law James tapped his expensive watch impatiently, eager to hear how much he had gained from my husband's death. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, my heart heavy with loss. My husband Richard had built an empire from nothing, and now that he was gone, I was hoping, just hoping, that he had left something meaningful behind for me. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice firm but cold. As per Mr. Whitmore's final wishes, he began, the controlling shares of Whitmore Enterprises will be transferred to his son, Daniel. The estate properties will be divided between Daniel and James. Vanessa's eyes sparkled like she had just won the lottery. She even squeezed Daniel's hand under the table, her grin spreading across her face. Then the lawyer looked at me. My pulse quickened, and I held my breath. To Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, he continued. Richard leaves. He paused, glancing at the paper again, as if he thought it was a mistake. An old wooden music box, the one that sat on his study shelf. A stunned silence filled the room. Vanessa's laughter broke at first, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through me like glass. A music box? She scoffed. Oh my God, is that it? After 30 years of marriage, that's all she gets. Daniel looked embarrassed, but he didn't defend me. James actually chuckled and shook his head, muttering under his breath, guess Richard thought you had enough already. My cheeks burned, and my hands trembled as the music box was placed before me. It was dusty, chipped, and utterly ordinary. I ran my fingers over it, remembering how Richard used to wind it late at night. I thought maybe it was sentimental, but in that room, under their mocking stares, it felt like an insult. Mom, Daniel said softly, avoiding my eyes, maybe Dad wanted you to have something personal, not business. But Vanessa smirked, her words dripping with poison. Personal or useless? Face it, Margaret, you're not part of this anymore. You're just, what's the word? Retired. Their laughter bubbled again, sharp and cruel. I felt like the walls were closing in. 30 years by Richard's side, supporting him through every battle, every sleepless night, and this was how they saw me now, irrelevant, discarded, pathetic. I forced myself to sit tall, my chin raised with dignity. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. If that's my husband's wish, I'll honor it, I said, lifting the box with trembling hands. But inside, I shattered. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the box. Their laughter echoed in my head, cruel words bouncing off the walls. Useless, worthless, retired. I pressed the winding key, and the familiar lullaby filled the room, a melody Richard used to hum absent-mindedly while working. I closed my eyes, letting the notes carry me back to better times until I heard something strange. A faint rattle. I frowned, shaking the box lightly. There it was again. Something inside. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. My breath caught, my fingers suddenly cold. Richard, what did you leave me? I grabbed a small screwdriver from the drawer and carefully pried open the wooden bottom. The music stopped abruptly, and inside, nestled beneath the gears and springs, was a folded envelope. My hands shook as I slid it out. Written in Richard's familiar handwriting were the words, for Margaret. Only you can be trusted. My heart pounded as I unfolded the letter, my eyes scanning the page, and what I saw made the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just sentimental. It was a secret that could destroy everything Vanessa and James thought they had just inherited. And for the first time that day, I smiled. The letter in my trembling hands felt heavier than gold. It was as though Richard had reached out from the grave, whispering to me that I was not as forgotten as they thought. My eyes darted over the words, my breath hitching with every line. Richard wrote about hidden accounts, about business shares that no one else knew existed, about a legacy he had tucked away in silence. He wrote that he had hidden evidence of fraud, of betrayal, of the lies that James and even Daniel had wrapped around the company. My knees went weak, and I sank onto the sofa, clutching the letter against my chest. This wasn't just an old music box. This was a weapon. Richard explained that years ago, when James had begun to sniff around for more power, he had caught him funneling money out of the company. Instead of confronting him publicly, Richard had gathered proof, waiting for the right time. He wanted me to have it because he trusted no one else. He feared Daniel had already been poisoned by greed and by Vanessa's poisonous whispers. I pulled the rest of the items from the hidden compartment. There was a small flash drive, carefully wrapped in parchment, and a faded photograph tucked beside it. The photograph showed Richard standing with a man I didn't recognize, but on the back was scrawled, "He will help you when the time comes." My pulse hammered in my ears as I stared at the flash drive. I wasn't tech savvy, but I knew enough to understand that what was inside could be explosive. With trembling fingers, I plugged it into my old laptop. Files popped up instantly, dozens of them, each one carefully labeled. Financial statements, offshore accounts, emails between James and Vanessa, proof of transactions that bled the company dry. My heart pounded faster with each click, each revelation. They weren't just greedy, they were criminals. I leaned back in the chair, the screen glowing in the darkened room. For hours, I read, my grief slowly transforming into something sharper, anger, determination. The humiliation I had endured in that lawyer's office replayed in my mind. But now, instead of tears, a fire burned in my chest. I whispered to myself, they thought I was useless. They thought I was finished. But Richard gave me the power to bring them down. The letter ended with one final line, scribbled almost urgently, trust. No one but him. The mysterious man in the photograph. I turned the picture over again, studying the face, sharp eyes, a stern mouth, a suit that looked expensive but worn with purpose. Who was he? And why did Richard trust him so much? I tucked everything back into the music box, locking it tight again. I knew I couldn't let Daniel or Vanessa suspect that I had discovered anything. To them, I was still the foolish widow with nothing but a sentimental trinket. But inside that box was enough to topple their empire, to strip them of everything they had stolen from me. As dawn broke the next morning, I stared out the window, clutching my coffee cup. For the first time since Richard's death, I didn't feel weak. I felt alive. I felt dangerous. Yet, questions clawed at my mind. Should I go to the police? Should I confront Daniel? Or should I follow Richard's instructions and find the man in the photograph? First, the safe option was the police. But Richard hadn't trusted them. He hadn't trusted anyone. And so, neither could I decided then and there. I would find the man in the photo. I would learn what Richard had planned. And then, I would make them all regret ever laughing at me. The photograph burned in my hand like a key I didn't yet know how to use. The man's sharp eyes seemed to stare right back at me, as if daring me to find him. I had no name, no address. Just the face and Richard's cryptic message. For 2 days, I scoured through Richard's old desk drawers, his emails, even his phone records. Vanessa and Daniel called me, pretending to check on me, but I knew their concern was nothing but a mask. They wanted to make sure I wasn't planning anything, that I was still the broken widow. Finally, in an old planner, tucked behind receipts and scribbled notes, I found a clue. A name written in Richard's bold handwriting, Edward Cole. Beside it, a number and a single word underlined twice, trust. My hands shook as I dialed the number. The line clicked, and a deep, steady voice answered, "Who is this?" I hesitated, fear clawing at my throat. "My name is Margaret," I whispered. "Richard's wife." There was a long silence, and then the man sighed heavily. "If you've called me, then things are worse than I hoped." He didn't ask how Richard was. He already knew, and in that moment, I realized Richard must have prepared him for this. Edward agreed to meet me the next day in a quiet cafe downtown, far from the eyes of my family. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with questions. Could I trust him? Was he truly on my side, or just another man waiting to profit from my vulnerability? The next morning, I arrived early, clutching the music box like a lifeline. When Edward walked in, I recognized him instantly. His presence was commanding, his eyes sharp but kind, his movements deliberate. He slid into the booth across from me without a word, and for a moment, we simply stared at each other. "Richard trusted you," I said, finally, my voice trembling. "Why?" Edward leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Because I was his lawyer, but more importantly, I was his friend. He knew what James and Vanessa were doing. He wanted to expose them. But he feared it would destroy Daniel if he wasn't ready to see the truth." Tears welled in my eyes as Edward spoke Richard's name with such quiet loyalty. It felt like I had found an anchor in a storm. I told him about the letter, about the flash drive, about the files that revealed everything. As I spoke, his expression grew darker. That evidence is enough to bury them, he said, but it has to be handled carefully, or they'll twist it against you. I leaned closer, whispering, they already think I'm nothing. They think I'll fade into the background, but I want to fight back. Will you help me? Edward studied me for a long moment before nodding. If you're ready to do what it takes, then yes. But you need to understand, this won't be easy. James has power. Daniel has influence. And Vanessa, well, Vanessa has a talent for cruelty. I clenched my fists under the table. I don't care how cruel they are. They took my dignity, my security, my place in Richard's life. I want it back. Edward smiled faintly, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. Then we start tonight. He handed me a small envelope across the table. Inside are instructions. Places will go. People will meet. Richard left more for you than just that flash drive. My pulse quickened as I tucked the envelope into my bag. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this battle. I had an ally. I had a plan. But as I walked out of the cafe, a shiver ran down my spine. Across the street, I spotted Vanessa's car. She was sitting behind the wheel, her sunglasses hiding her eyes, but I knew she was watching. My heart sank. If she suspected anything, my entire plan could crumble before it began. And yet, instead of fear, a strange calm settled over me. Let her watch. Let her wonder. She had no idea what was coming. The moment I slipped Edward's envelope into my bag, I knew there was no turning back. Every step from then on would bring me closer to exposing James, Vanessa, and Daniel. Every misstep could destroy me completely. That night, alone in my room, I opened the envelope. Inside, there was a list of names, dates, and addresses, each one tied directly to Richard's secret efforts to protect me. There were accountants who had traced James's embezzlement. There were employees who had suffered under Daniel's reckless decisions. And there were quiet notes about Vanessa's manipulation, her lies, her cruelty. I read until my eyes blurred, and still I couldn't stop. It felt like Richard was guiding me, speaking from beyond the grave, placing the pieces in my hands. For the first time in months, I felt strong. The next day, Edward and I began to meet with people on the list. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of James's power. But when I showed them Richard's notes, when they realized I was fighting for justice, their fear turned into determination. One by one, they agreed to stand by me. Edward said it was like building an army. And, in a way, it was. Not an army of soldiers, but an army of truth-tellers, people who had been wronged, silenced, or cast aside by James's greed and Vanessa's poison. Every day, I played the role of the grieving widow in front of Daniel and Vanessa. I smiled weakly when they called. I thanked them for their support. All the while, I was gathering evidence, weaving a net that would catch them all. One evening, Edward came to my house with a small box. Inside were copies of the financial records, neatly organized. He placed them on the table and looked at me with a serious expression. Margaret, this is enough to take James down, but timing will be everything. I nodded, my heart pounding. Tell me what I need to do. Edward leaned back, his voice calm but firm. We will reveal everything at the next board meeting. James won't expect you to attend, but when you walk in, you will hold all the power. A thrill ran through me at the thought. The very man who had dismissed me, who had stripped me of dignity, would be forced to face me in front of everyone. And not just him, but Vanessa and Daniel too. In the weeks that followed, Edward and I rehearsed every step. He taught me how to present the evidence, how to remain calm under their attacks, how to let the truth speak louder than their lies. It was exhausting, but it gave me purpose. At night, I lay awake, imagining the moment. I pictured James's smug smile fading. I pictured Vanessa's eyes widening in panic. I pictured Daniel realizing too late that he had chosen the wrong side. And yet, beneath the fire of revenge, there was still sorrow. I longed for Richard's hand in mine, his steady presence, his voice telling me I could do this. But I also knew he had prepared me for exactly this moment. The night before the board meeting, I sat alone with the music box. I wound it once more, letting the tune drift softly through the room. Tomorrow, I whispered to the air. Tomorrow, they will see who I really am. As I closed my eyes, I thought of the years I had been silent, the years I had played the part of the obedient wife, the invisible widow. All of that ended now. I was ready. I would rise. And when I did, James, Vanessa, and Daniel would fall. The morning of the board meeting, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my black dress. It was simple, but strong, a reflection of the woman I had become. No longer invisible, no longer silent, I was ready to face them. When I arrived at the company building, the air felt heavy. Employees bustled through the halls, their faces tense with whispers of another decision James was about to announce. I walked slowly, each step echoing, each one fueled by Richard's memory. In the boardroom, James sat at the head of the table, Vanessa by his side, Daniel leaning back with his usual arrogance. They didn't expect me. When I entered, their expressions shifted, first shock, then annoyance, then thinly veiled scorn. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" James asked, his voice dripping with irritation. "This is a closed meeting." I smiled faintly, setting the folder on the table. "Actually, it's the perfect meeting for me to attend, because today, truth takes its place at this table." Murmurs spread among the board members. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, her hand tightening around her notebook. Daniel rolled his eyes, but I could see the flicker of doubt behind his smirk. I opened the folder and began to speak. Every word was clear, measured, guided by the nights of preparation with Edward. I presented the financial records, the testimony from employees, the proof of embezzlement and fraud. At first, James tried to interrupt, slamming his hand on the table. "This is nonsense," he barked, but the evidence was undeniable. Every sheet I placed before them cut through his defense, like a knife slicing through fabric. Vanessa's face turned pale. She whispered something to James, but he pushed her hand away, sweat beading on his forehead. Daniel leaned forward now, his confidence crumbling. The board members exchanged looks of shock, then disgust. They had trusted James, followed his lead, believed his lies. Now they saw him for what he truly was. Finally, I lifted the photograph from the music box. It was the one Richard had hidden, the one showing James and Vanessa together in secret, plotting even before his death. A collective gasp filled the room. This company was built by Richard's blood and vision. I said, my voice firm, "And you tried to destroy it. But today, the truth stands, and so do I." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Then the chairman of the board cleared his throat. "Margaret, we thank you for bringing this forward," he said gravely. Effective immediately, James is removed from his position. Gasps turned into whispers. James's face twisted with rage. "You regret this, Margaret?" He spat, but his words fell flat, powerless. Vanessa grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clacking against the floor. Daniel slumped in his chair, the weight of his betrayal heavy on his shoulders. They had walked into the meeting thinking they were untouchable. They walked out broken, exposed, and finished. I remained seated, my hands steady on the folder. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt peace. The chains of silence, of humiliation, had been broken. As the meeting ended, Edward walked up to me, his eyes held pride, his voice warm. "Richard would be proud," he said softly. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of triumph, of survival, of justice finally delivered. As I left the building, the sun broke through the clouds. The city below seemed brighter, freer, as if it too had shed a heavy shadow. And, in my heart, I whispered to Richard, "We did it, my love." The painting, the music box, the photograph, they were more than objects. They were his last gift, his last guidance, his way of making sure I rose when they tried to keep me down. And rise I did.